All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, begin by thanking all of our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Teri Czinn, for dedicating all of Shimon drushos this month with gratitude to Hashem for their fifth grandchild, Gavriel Amichai Czinn, and the memory of Steve's mother, Devorah, Basra, Yisroel Yoel. Shaindy and Avraham Kelman, Yisrael Yoel, commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's father, Rephael Yechiel ben Avraham Kelman. Our week of learning sponsors. Jeff Schwartz, commemoration of the first yahrzeit of his father, Shmuel ben Shimon HaLevi, and we dedicate our learning Le'ilui Nishmos, Toba Rabinowitz, Toba bas Yehoshua, Yaakov Zichron Livracha, sister of Shevy Friedman, and memory of Adina Zahavi, Adina bas Sheva bas Dov ber Azriel, sister of Yossi Opendin. We also dedicate, today's daf is the shir is dedicated by Matt Marks in honor of the anniversary. What number anniversary? 50th anniversary of his bar mitzvah, Mazel Tov, which also was on a Thursday. Mazel Tov, Mir Hashem, you should be zochet, celebrate many more anniversaries. Amev Esim Shanim Tovos. Mazel Tov. And we dedicate our learning Le'ilui Nishmos, the fallen soldiers, Captain Eli Elisha Lugasi, Sergeant Alexander Lekminsky, and Master Sergeant Nadav Elchanan Noller, and Major Eyal Avinon. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, then Neshamas will have an aliyah, their families in Nechama, all of our soldiers should be successful, B'chol Ma'aseh Yadim, and our hostages should come home b'shalom and b'karov. We'll say with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Some really great Gemara, but a lot of it. Baruch Hashem. So we left off yesterday. Today's daf is daf tes. We left off yesterday, I believe, at B'masnisa Tana, which is two, in the wide, let's just do like this, and where the wide lines start, 2, 4, 6 lines into the wide lines. B'masnisa Tana, V'maskilim yasiru kizah harakia. What does it mean that ultimately, again, those who understand will be luminescent like the heavens? Zedayon shedan din emes lamita v'gabait tzedakah. This refers, what does it mean that these individuals who shine like the brightness of the sky? This refers to a dayan, a judge, who adjudicates a case correctly, and a gabbai tzedakah, obviously, who is honest with his dealings. Umatzdike harabim ki kochavim li'olam va'ed. And what does it mean? Those who go ahead and literally matzdik, those who endow the rabbim with righteousness are like the stars who burn bright forever. Who does that refer to as the beautiful? Elam alamdei tinokos. These refer to the rebbeim, to teach young children. Kigon man, like who? Amrav kigon Rav Shmuel Bashilas, like Rav Shmuel Bashilas. What was unique about Rav Shmuel Bashilas? To Rav Ashkechev Rav Shmuel Bashilas, Davekai beginsa. So we'll say this is beautiful. So Rav found Rav Shmuel Bashilas. Rav Shmuel Bashilas was a known Rebbe, the Rebbe to young children. So Rav once found him strolling in the garden. Amrlei Shavkasi lehimelech. So this is incredible. So Rav said to him, Have you abandoned your Talmidim? In other words, what are you doing spaziering in the garden? Right? Don't you have a job to do? In other words, we'll say, the job of a Rebbe, the job of a leader is never done. So Rav was almost giving him like a little bit of musar. What, you're taking vacation? Right? You're strolling around the garden. What's going on over here? Amrlei, so this is beautiful. What's there? Shmuel Bashilas says, Hatlesa shnin delo chazili. I have not seen this garden for 13 years. I haven't seen this garden for 13 years. So what he was saying was, I haven't taken a break for 13 years. So I took a few minutes to stroll in the garden. And even now, as I stroll in the garden, my mind is always upon my Talmidim. Such a beautiful Gemara Rabbanon. So what about those who learn Torah perpetually? What is the praise afforded to them? That those who love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and those who are beloved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are as luminescent as the sun when it rises. Beautiful. So it was very interesting. So we spoke about this yesterday, that ideally tzedakah, we'll talk about this more today, tzedakah should really be collected by groups of 2 individuals. This way, again, not everyone is above. There's no suspicion of anyone chas v'shalom taking money for themselves. So the Gemara says, so therefore, when 2 people are collecting tzedakah, they really shouldn't split up. In other words, they should do their collections together. The Gemara says, but one could go to the entranceway of the city, one could go to the store. In other words, they don't literally have to be together. The point is they have to be collecting at the same time. But they can be in different areas within the same vicinity. Matzah mos, so we'll say very interesting halachas over here. Let's say Reuven's collecting tzedakah, and as he's walking through the marketplace, he finds money in the marketplace. Now, remembering it was from Bava Metzia days, what's the halacha if you find money in the marketplace? What's the halacha? You can keep it. So I will say, here's what's interesting. Let's say the guy by tzedakah finds money in the marketplace. Lo yitnem b'soch kiso. He should not put the money in his pocket. Elanosin l'soch arniki shel tzedakah. He should put it in the pushka. U'lichashiyav l'beiso yitleim. And when he comes home, he'll take the money. We'll say, what's the concern over here? The concern over here is if somebody sees the guy by tzedakah putting money in his pocket, right? So l'maisa, again, people will jump to the wrong conclusion that he's pocketing tzedakah money. So you're both say, the most incredible underlying piece of human nature about this Gemara is what? People always assume the worst about each other. That's the default, right? The default is that when I see you doing something, I'm always assuming that it's something wrong. By the way, we know that this is the default. Why is it the default? Because if it wasn't the default, there wouldn't be an obligation to be dan lekaf zechus. The fact that the halacha says you have to give someone the benefit of the doubt indicates that what? That this is not the default setting. Right? If it was the default setting, halacha wouldn't have to say anything. The fact that we have to go out of our way, don't judge your friend, all of these ma'amari chazal that speak about judging people favorably. Why? Because it's human nature, ultimately, again, to judge people disfavorably. Disfavorably is that a word? Unfavorably. By the way, I appreciate the fact that everyone has stopped correcting my English in general. I do appreciate that. Right, so ultimately, the default is to judge people unfavorably. It's just incredible. It's important for us to understand this about ourselves. How when we see people doing things or people say things, and we can interpret it both ways. It's incredible how our mind always shifts to the unfavorable. I'm sure there's a psychology to it as to why it is. I think part of it is that we all recognize, each of us knows that inside of us there are things that are broken. We all know that we have broken things. I think that most of us are also really unwilling to go ahead and deal with our broken things. So I think often what we do in life is we project our own broken kite onto other people. That's at the end of the day what happens. And therefore when I see someone, I can see something broken, so instead of dealing with my own broken kite, I can go ahead and focus and perseverate on someone else's broken kite. Whereas you see this, that people who are happier with themselves and people who feel that they're in a good place in life in general are much less judgmental. People who are unhappy, people who are sarcastic, cynical, it's often because they have a lot of unresolved stuff in themselves, and they'll project that onto everyone else. In any event, a lot to learn from these Gemaras. But therefore, again, Chazal said, you're collecting tzedakah, don't put the money in your pocket. Don't put the money in your pocket, put it in the pushka. When you come home, you can take out that which belongs to you. So the Gemara goes weiter. If let's say the guy by tzedakah, and you lend someone money, and your friend paid you back in the shuk, lo yitnem b'soch kiso. Don't put the money in your pocket. Same idea. Don't put the money in your pocket. And put it in the pushka, which I both say, it sounds so counterintuitive, right? To me, I don't know. The notion of putting something in the pushka, and then when you get home, taking it out, feels like very, I guess the technical term is icky, right? In other words, it doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do. Yet, interestingly enough, given the choices at hand, either putting it in your pocket or putting it in your pushka, put it in the pushka. When you get home, you'll take it out. Also, tremendous musaska. Sometimes life is a series of choices between things that are bad and not as bad. So in other words, sometimes there's not like necessarily a good option. So to either put it in my pocket, put it in the pushka, neither one sounds really great. But putting in the pushka at least is a little bit better. Anyway, the Gemara goes weiter. So let's say you have a guy by tzedakah and there are no aniyim to give money to. They'll say halavai. To be zocher to a time like that where there are no aniyim to give tzedakah to. So what's the problem? The problem is that the guy by tzedakah has money. Now, both in Rashi's understanding over here that the coins that he has are subject to what we'll call coin erosion. So what he wants to do is he wants to redeem the coins to larger copper coins. That way there's less of a loss. So what's the halacha? Partin la'achin and partin la'atzman. In other words, you can't exchange money with yourself. If you're the guy by tzedakah, you can't exchange your own money for tzedakah funds, but rather you have to exchange with someone else. Again, the idea being, we don't want there to be any possibility of a person taking advantage of their position as a Gabbai Tzedakah. Gabbai Tamchoi, Shilmani Lechalik. Similarly, again, if you run the soup kitchen, and Baruch Hashem, there are no aniyim, business is slow, then I will say, then what's the halacha? You don't want the food to go to waste, so you could sell it. So what's the halacha? You could sell the food to someone else, you can't buy the food yourself. Interesting. When you're counting tzedakah money, I have to tell my shorter shine this Gemara. This is mamish gavai tzedakah's Gemara. So when you're counting tzedakah money, you can't count like 2 by 2 or in increments. Rather, you have to count it out, one coin, $1 at a time. Amar Abaye, Mereish lo havi Yosef Mar tzifi de b'kinishta. So Abaye says in the beginning, Mar would not sit on the mats of the shul. He felt that ultimately, again, since the mats were purchased from tzedakah funds, therefore using the mats, those are mats by the way, with their chairs. Using the mats, ultimately, again, would be usage of money, of tzedakah monies. Once he heard that, we'll say the halachas, you saw this already in yesterday's daf, restated again in today's daf, and when it comes to tzedakah money, the Gavai tzedakah, even if you collect it for one thing, has the ability to use it for something else. Now, obviously, this something else has to be within the realm of community needs. But I will say this happens all the time, right? There's a collection for X. Baruch Hashem, they raise enough money for X. So again, once the money is there for tzedakah money, it can be reallocated towards other tzedakah needs. So therefore, again, apparently they had enough money for tzedakah. They ended up buying new chairs for the shul. That's permitted. Therefore, Mar began to use them. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Abaye, Miresh Hava Avid Mar, Tre Kise. So Abaye says in the beginning, Mar used to go ahead and make 2 different pushkas, 2 different tzedakah collections. One for local aniyim and one for what we'll call out of town aniyim. Kevan Desham Lo Had Amar Yisroel Yoel Tachliva Baravini Avid Chad Kisa top of Tas Va'asni Allah. But once he heard what Shmuel says Rav Tachliva, that's what you don't have to make 2 different collection buckets. Rather, again, what do? You can make one. But you make it with a t'nai. What's the t'nai? I'm making 1 collection bucket, and I can use it for whatever I want, like local aniyim, out of town aniyim. Then ultimately, again, that's permitted. Ihunami Avid Chad Kisei V'asni Allah. Mar also did this as well. He consolidated everything into 1 tzedakah fund, made a t'nai. I can use this for in town, for out of town. And that was it. Ravashi says, Tessamud Aleph 9a, second line down. Ravashi Amar, Ana asnuye nami lo tzarichna, dechol de ka'asi adaita didi asi, or leman deba'ina yehivni leis. Ravashi says, in my tzedakah fund, everyone knows that I reserve the right to give it to whoever I want. And therefore, again, I don't need this tonight because whenever people give me money for tzedakah, or whenever they give me money to distribute for tzedakah, they understand that I'm going to use my own discretion. Hano beitrei. So I'll say, very interesting. Hano beitrei tafri, the avdi inyana bahadi adadi. There were these 2 butchers. 2 butchers lived in a town. Now the butchers made an internal agreement with each other. So we'll say this is like a butcher, like a union, not a union, a guild, right? Or a non-compete. So the idea over here is they had days, right? There'll be the butcher this day, I'll be the butcher that day. They had an agreement that in the event that one would encroach on the day or the other, they would tear up the hides of the butcher of that day. By tearing the hide becomes useless. Remember, you also as a butcher, not only do you benefit from the meat, but you benefit of the hide. So the idea is that if you went ahead and you violated it and you butchered on, this doesn't sound right as a verb, but you understand, you butchered on your non-butchering day, then you're penalized by the loss of your hide. Okay? So Gemara says, so sure enough, one of the butchers violated the agreement, and he butchered on a day that belonged to his friend. So they tore up his hide. So they came before Rava. Rava made the other butcher who tore up the hide of the encroaching butcher chayiv for the loss of the hide. So Rava said, you can't do that. I know the butcher. I know called Butcher A went ahead and butchered on the day of Butcher B, right? But Lamaisa, again, you can't tear up his hide, and therefore Rava held that he was chayiv to go ahead and compensate. Gemara says 1 second. But we learned already back in the Mishnah that halacha, whenever a community makes enactments, those enactments, that legislation is binding. And therefore, halacha, everyone has to abide by it. So I don't understand that they made an agreement that one butcher, right, has this day, a different butcher has another day, and they made an agreement that if you encroach, you lose your hide. So why isn't this binding? Why would you have to pay back the hide? To which the Gemara says, Lo ahadre Rava. So I'm sorry. Lo ahadar le Rava. Rava didn't respond. So in other words, Rava was the one who paskined that the butcher, right, the butcher who tore up the hide, has to go ahead and pay back his friend. They confronted Rava with this ruling. Rava didn't respond. So ultimately, Rava did a good job by not responding. Why? The Gemara says, so this is very interesting. When do people have a right to create community norms, and those are binding? That's when there is not an Adam Chashav, a Talmud Chacham in their midst. If there is a Talmud Chacham in their midst, before they adopt something as communally binding, they have an obligation to run the agreement by him and get his endorsement. Rava was the local Talmud Chacham. They didn't run this agreement by him, and therefore he felt it was not communally binding. Rava didn't want to respond to this. He didn't want to say this. Why? Because if he would say it, it would look a shtickle arrogant. So therefore, again, he just paskin, they're obligated to go ahead and pay back for the destroyed hide, because this was not a binding community practice, but he didn't want to say why that was, because it would have looked self-serving. Incredible. So this is very interesting halacha. We do not go ahead and make an accounting of tzedakah monies dispersed. Neither with the Gabbai tzedakah, nor with hektish with the gizbar. Now both say, here's what's interesting. So this is fascinating. Apparently, there was never an audit of Beis HaMikdash books. Right? There was never an audit, an internal audit for the gizbar. Now both say, now what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that there was such a high volume of transactions. Right? And often what ended up happening was the Gizbar had to go ahead and make all these different types of decisions. There was never an internal audit. So the Gemara says, so too with the Gabbai Tzedakah, there is no audit. Now obviously, what this then requires is what? Now I'm going to say now, this whole thing comes full circle. If there's no internal audit, then what do you need? What do you need? Someone of impeccable honesty, right? And trustworthiness. So there's no, let's say, it's also in the Beis HaMikdash, it was divine. I think also there's something different. To be able to do the job, ultimately, again, of Gabbai Tzedakah, there has to be tremendous trust. Because sometimes in the disbursement of tzedakah, there are things that have to be done, as we're going to discuss, to preserve dignity. Sometimes, therefore, again, those transactions are not fully transparent. I'll give you a perfect example. Imagine the Gabbai Tzedakah can't give a check to someone, right? Why? Because a check has a paper trail. Check has a paper trail. He knows this person is going to be humiliated by a paper trail that other people see. So the Gabbai Tzedakah has to give cash. So suddenly again, there's a big withdrawal of cash from the Tzedakah fund, right? And there's no allocation as to who it's for, because the whole thing has to be kept quiet. So I say, so can you imagine doing an internal audit on that? That certainly seems to trigger a couple of red flags. But again, it's not a red flag. It's the way tzedakah has to work. So it's fascinating. So there's no internal audit. And therefore there has to be a profound sense of trust in the person who's administrating this process. Incredible. Even though there's no raya to this, there's no explicit pasuk, there's a zecher. What's the zecher? Shneimar, v'lo yechashvu es ha'anoshim asher yitnu es ha'kesef ha'yadam, laseis la'oseh ha'malacha, ki be'emuna heim osim. So in Malachim, this is by the Beis HaMikdash. Ultimately, again, there was no accounting after the fact. Ultimately, again, because they conduct themselves with emunah, with trustworthiness. Amar Elazar, afa pi sheish li adam gizbar ne'eman b'soch beiso, yatzar v'yimneh shene'emar v'yatzur v'yimnu. Even though you have a trustworthy gizbar, someone who is handling your tzedakah, and I will say, even though we just said before that there is no ex post facto internal audit or accounting, when you give the gizbar the money, give the gizbar an exact amount of money. The gizbar should know exactly how much it is that he's receiving. So that way, you know what you're giving him, and he knows what you're giving him. Incredible. Rafuna, fascinating Gemara. Both kilim mazonos and both kilim chsus. Both listen to this. If somebody comes before us, an ani comes before us, and he asks for food, so what's the halacha? Bodkin. We investigate. In other words, you don't just give out food. We investigate his claim. Does he really need food or not? Vein bodkin l'chsus. But if somebody comes asking for clothing, says he doesn't have clothing, we give him, and we don't investigate the claim. This could either be a pasuk or it could be a logic. So we'll say maybe it's svara. Ha-kamavazi v'ha-lo kamavazi. We'll say for a person to ask for clothing is such a desperate and destitute place to be in. And the Pashas, they present in a certain way as well. In that type of humiliation, we don't start with investigations, rather we just give them the clothing. Ibais emakra halo parosh l'ra'av lachmecha. B'shin ksiv parosh v'hadar havle. So I'll say actually the vocalization is, right, paros. It's right, paros, but we vocalize it as if it has a shin, which means parosh means to explain. Get the perish, get the understanding, and then go ahead and give him to eat. So you see from here that giving food out requires investigation before the distribution. Giving clothing out does not require prior investigation. V'hasam ksiv kisira aram v'chisiso. Pasuk says when you will see someone who is unclothed, you should clothe him. Kisira, when you see him, la'alter, immediately remedy that deficiency. Rabbi Yehuda says a little bit differently. He says, Bodkin l'ksus ve'in bodkin l'mazonos. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, just the opposite. We do an investigation for clothing, we don't do an investigation for food. Someone comes asking for clothing, we investigate whether or not they're really needy. If they're asking for food, we don't investigate, we just give. So the Gemara says, svara, could either be a pasuk or it could be logic. Svara, if it's logic, high kamitzarele, high low kamitzarele. Shabbos says, so again, person doesn't have food, that's tsar. That's tsar. Person doesn't have clothing, it might be uncomfortable, but it's not the same level of acute tsar. Therefore, someone comes asking for for food, you give it to them. The other possible is a pasuk, ksiv halo paros l'rav lachmecha paros la'alter. So the pasuk says literally paros l'rav lachmecha, spread out to the hungry your bread. Paros la'alter, give it to him immediately. V'asam ksiv kisira aram l'chisiso l'chishira l'cha. Okay, Tanya Kavas Rabbi Yehuda. There's a brayso that supports Rabbi Yehuda. Amar kisuni. Person comes to the Gabbai Tzedakah and he says, I need clothing. Bodkin acharav. We investigate this famous whether or not he actually needs clothing or not. Parnasuni, ultimately again, if he asks for food, in Bodkin, ultimately again, we don't investigate. And I will say that is indeed how the Shulchan Aruch codifies in the Hilchos Tzedakah. Someone asks for food, someone says that they're hungry, you give them. There we don't investigate the claim, you give them immediately. Someone asks for clothing, that could trigger an investigation. When we say that, investigation is the wrong word. It's not investigation. It's just we want to look into it. Just inquire about the veracity of the claim. Okay, Tanan Hasam. Supposed to be learned. In Pochsin, we'll say first of the widest lines. In Pochsin, la'ani open makom l'makom mikfar pundion kikar bepundion me'arba sin b'sela. So we'll say if you have an ani who's passing through, so he's not one of the residents of the city. He's passing through, he says he needs food, so you make sure that we give him a loaf of bread that is the equivalent of a pundion, that's an amount, a pundion, when you could buy 4 si'in of flour for a sela. Fine, so a certain loaf of a certain size. Lon, if he sleeps in the city, nostin lo parnosas lino. We give him what he needs to sleep. What does he need to sleep? The Gemara says, my parnosas lino, papa, purya ubeisaja. We give him a bed and a pillow. Okay, so when he's passing through, he says he needs a place to stay. We give him a bed and a pillow. Next, Shabbos, if he's there for a week, or there for Shabbos, nostin lo mazon shalosh sudos. We'll say someone's staying in the city for Shabbos. We make sure that we get, this is all on him. We make sure we give him enough food for 3 meals. Tana. We'll say it's fascinating. If there's an ani in town and he is collecting from individuals, we do not give him from the community fund. Well, we'll say, what does that mean? If the halacha says like this, if you're savvy enough to be able to collect from individuals, then there's no need for the community fund to support you. The community fund was there. It's interesting. The community fund was there for those who perhaps did not know how to collect wealth from individuals. This way, again, we give them a lump sum. Once someone has demonstrated their ability to go ahead and collect from individuals, he can't collect from the community fund as well. Very interesting. There was a particular ani who was going door to door collecting. So what happened? The Gemara says, "Papa," and then he came before a papa for a check for a contribution from the community fund. Lo mizdakikli. Papa wouldn't give him anything. Based on what we just said, he said, "Look, you've been collecting from individuals. There's no need for me to give you a check from the community fund if you've been collecting from individuals." So Amalei Rav Sama Braid Rav Yeva Rav Papa I Mar lo mizdakikli in Shachri lo mizdakikli. So again, Rav Yeva said to Rav Papa, here's the problem: if you don't give him, people are going to see that you're not giving him. Individuals are going to stop giving to this person as well. So the Mercer Rav Papa said, but one second, but Rav Papa said, but it's a braysa. The Brisa said that if the money is collected from individuals, we don't have an obligation to go ahead and give them from the community fund. The Bible says incredible. Amalei in his kakin lo lematan meruba. You don't have to give him a lot. You don't have to give him a lot. Aval niskakin lo lematana mu'edes. So Rabbi said, this is incredible. You're right. If the ani is collecting individual to individual, then halacha l'maisa, you are not obligated to go ahead and give him a lot from the community fund. But what? You should give him something. Because why? What's the concern? The concern is that the community fund gives him nothing. So Rabbi say, again, so much of this Gemara is the same theme. People often don't understand the rationale behind things. So what do? We rush to snap judgment based on what we see. So therefore, again, what occurs? Since Ani goes to Rav Papa, someone sees Rav Papa's not giving him money from the community fund. So we'll say, what's the assumption? A crook. Right? He's obviously dishonest. Meanwhile, that's not it at all. Rav Papa's like, it's a Gemara. He's collecting from individuals. Don't give him. So therefore, again, Rav Yehuda said, you got to give him something. You got to give him something. This way, we don't have to give him a lot because he's collecting from the individuals, but you have to give him something lest people think that he's not deserving of donations. I will say, this is also, we always speak about this, this is so important that when these individuals, right, our brothers, come collecting, I will say it is so important to try to give something. A Jew opens his hands, you should always give something. Whether you give, the script, whether you give $1, whether you give a quarter, it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference to the person what you're giving. But Lamaisa, a Jew opens his hands, you have an obligation to give. You have an obligation to give. And it's because we all know it's not a financial question, right? We spend waste money on the most ridiculous things, right? And if you're one of those, just aside, if you're one of those people who goes to Starbucks and spends ridiculous amounts of money on a coffee, shame on you. Shame on you, right? No, 7-Eleven is perfect. Wawa is great, right? No, absolutely no need to get your frappuccino, macchiato, shappuccino, latte, vente, shente, mente. It's stupid, right? But if you do that, if you're one of those people who do that, then absolutely you need to be opening up your wallet every single time an ani comes around. Because if you could spend $7 on a cup of coffee, you absolutely could give a quarter or $1 to another Jew in need. Whether you think he should be working, shouldn't be working, should be in the army, should be doing this, should be a rocket scientist, should be in Kola, should be Rosh Yeshiva, that's not your place. That's not your place to decide what someone else should be doing. Your place is, when someone comes to you and he says that he's in need, no judgment, just chesed. How much, how little, that's up to you. That's up to you. Because when you don't give, the message that you're ultimately promoting to those around you, I'll say again, people see you and you don't give, you don't know the negative effect that has on someone else. Because every single one of us have other people who look up to us. So when Ani comes by, I always get a little, it's always interesting to see a little bit of a bird's eye view. Sometimes the Ani comes by and a person's like looking in their sitter and they avoid eye contact. It's like saying, buddy, you have not looked in your sitter that intently for the last 5 years. Now suddenly it happens to be for the 30 seconds that a precious Jew is walking by, suddenly you're glued. You're fixated. You're fixated. Stop. If you don't have, you don't have. You could say to the person, I'm so sorry, I don't have. But when I say again, a Yid walks by. A person can't have a Lev Eben. You can't have a heart of stone to ignore that. How much, how little, that's up to you. But Pesach Tiftach, give something to every single Jew. If you don't, sometimes you don't know the negative ripple effect that sends. Someone else sees you. We all have people look up to us. Someone sees you not give. I don't know the negative effect that could have. Chas v'shalom. All right, back to the Gemara. We're going to add Starbucks onto the dog's wings list. The list is growing. The Gemara goes right there. So the Gemara says as follows. Good. So the Gemara says, Hahu Anya. No, sorry, we said that. Good. Amravasi. Liolam. Al yimna adam atzmo milase shlishis hashekel b'shana. A person should always make sure to give at least a third of a shekel per year. So this is like the minimum amount of tzedakah. Obviously, this is not talking about meiser, right? The concept of taking a tenth of our earnings, if you can, and give that to tzedakah. This is talking about just bare minimum tzedakah, right? And bare minimum tzedakah is a third of a shekel. Shneimar, ve'amanu alinu mitzvos lase selenu shlishas hashekel b'shana lavodas beis Elokeinu. But Ravasi, shkula tzedakah kineged kol mitzvos. Wow, tzedakah is as important as all mitzvos. I'll say, is that not incredible? Tzedakah is as powerful as all mitzvos. Shneimar, ve'amanu alinu mitzvos. Because the pasuk says literally again that when one performs the mitzvah of tzedakah, it's as if we've established, we've performed all of the mitzvos. Mitzvah in ksib kind of doesn't say a mitzvah, rather ella mitzvos. So we'll say this. We all know this. Tzedakah is the hardest mitzvah. Tzedakah is the hardest mitzvah. And why is it the hardest mitzvah? Because I will say money is incredibly important. Money is very important, right? Generally, when you see people who say that money is not so important, generally, who says that money is not so important? People who have an overwhelming amount of it, right? But generally, for those of us who don't have an overwhelming amount, money is incredibly important. And most of us, if not all of us, work very hard for every single last dollar. And to be able to part with that, literally, it's like parting with a piece of yourself. It really is. It's the most incredibly difficult thing. And therefore the Torah says, the Gemara says, that literally when a person performs the mitzvah of tzedakah is the greatest amount of mesiras nefesh. If you think about it. Tzedakah is mesiras. I literally have to give of myself. So a person is moser nefesh, they give tzedakah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, it's as if you've performed all of the mitzvahs. So the Gemara goes, this is beautiful. Moshe is someone who enables or encourages others to go ahead and give tzedakah. Although it's not just limited to tzedakah, it's really all mitzvahs is even greater than the performance of the mitzvah itself. Moshe, what does that mean? When you become an enabler of other people's spiritual growth, that's even more powerful than your own spiritual growth, which makes a lot of sense because my own growth is mine. When I become an enabler for others, that's a force multiplier. Then suddenly again I have the chilik in all of that other dynamic activity that's happening over here. So a person gives tzedakah, that's incredible. That's incredible. A person goes ahead and encourages others to give tzedakah, right, and enables others to give tzedakah, that's dramatically amazing. Shayna Eric Czinn, Lo zacha va'aniyim merudim tavi bayis. So we'll say it again. The Gemara says if you're zocha, ultimately again you'll be able to spend your money on tzedakah. If you're not zocha, literally again the aniyim merudim. So we'll say we're going to see this reference to Rome. The Romans are going to take your money. Now we'll say the Gemara is going to highlight this motif, and I'll just tell you this just outside for a second. The Gemara operates with this simple understanding. There's a certain amount of money that you are quote unquote going to lose every single year. That's the way it's ordained. The choice I have is, I can quote-unquote lose it by giving it away willingly to tzedakah, or it'll be taken from me by other matters. So we'll say it's incredible. There's a certain amount, just like is a certain amount of money I'm going to earn, there's a certain amount of money that is going to be taken from me. You can't avoid it. It is going to be taken from you. But at the end of the day, you choose how that money is going to be quote-unquote taken from you. If you give tzedakah, then ultimately, again, it's going to be taken from you in a beautiful, meaningful, holy, and spiritual way that you decide. But if not, if you think you're saving money, it's going to be taken. I said, you ever have this time where you're feeling good, like you're putting away money, everything's great, and then something breaks in your house, right? And suddenly, again, there's it's such an interesting cheshbon. It's Gemara saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu is Kadosh Baruch Hu knows how much you're going to make, and He knows how much you're going to quote unquote lose. And I hate to use the word lose by tzedakah, but you understand what I mean. There's going to be a certain amount that's going to be removed from you. You choose how that removed money is going to be allocated. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. So we'll say, listen to this. Rav said to Bnei Mechuza, he said literally again, give tzedakah. So we'll say, it's actually very beautiful. Rav was saying to the people of Mechuza, give tzedakah amongst you. We'll say, I've often had this idea that I think could be something beautiful, which is for people to kind of pull together and create like a tzedakah cohort. Imagine if you had a group of people who pulled their meiser money together, right, and said, okay, now we're a tzedakah conglomerate, right? There's a block now. There's a keren. There's money that's there. And suddenly, again, instead of just one off, you can make dramatic differences in the world of tzedakah in any event. So Rabbi says to the people of Mechuza, right, guys, give tzedakah, because if you don't give tzedakah, right, if you give tzedakah, there'll be shalom with the malchus. Now, what does that mean? What Rabbi was saying is if you give tzedakah, fantastic. If you don't give tzedakah, the government's going to take your money. So I'm Rabbi Lazar, Bisman Beis Hamikdash Kaim, Adam Shokel Shiklom Iskaperlo. This is beautiful. When Beis Hamikdash stood, a person would give his machzis hashakel, and his machzis hashakel would atone for him. Achshav she'in Beis Hamikdash Kaim. Now that there is no Beis Hamikdash, im osin tzedakah mutav ve'im lav ba'in ovdei kochav ve'not la bizroa. So we'll say this is incredible. This is incredible. So we'll say, so now when the Beis Hamikdash stood, each of us gave machzis a shekel, half a shekel, and what? And that atoned for you. That was kapara. Now that there is no Beis Hamikdash, we don't have machzis shekel, what do we have? We have tzedakah. And I will say, tzedakah atones for us. We have this concept where we'll see, tzedakah tatzil mimaves. Tzedakah has the ability to literally, again, reverse every decree. Tzedakah is as important as every single mitzvah. So ultimately, again, if you don't give tzedakah, like we said before, what's going to happen? The government's going to come and take your money. Or some other way you're going to lose your money. So what's it's interesting. So this is fascinating. The Gemara says, and if the government seizes your money, then ultimately, again, don't feel so terrible because that'll count to tzedakah as well. So the Marsha says, what's the pshat with that? So I'll say, so often what would happen is the government would seize from the rich in order to go ahead and pay off the debt for the poor. The Democrats did not invent this. Again, the Romans had this long before, right? So this idea that heavily tax those who have in order to offset the cost of those who don't. So the Gemara says, at least now it's like a chatzi nechama, that if the government seizes your money, it's kind of a shtickle tzedakah, right? It's a little bit of tzedakah, because your money is going to go ahead and offset the expenses of the poor. So even though it's seized, it's a little bit of tzedakah. Okay, Amar Rava, Hai Milsei Shtei Ula. Ula said to me this following day, I will say, I'm a days. Sorry. So the Gemara says, let me say it differently. Amar Rava, sorry, I read that wrong. Hai Milsei Shtei Li. This thing we're about to talk about was told to me by an Ula. Ula in this case is not Ula. Ula is a child. A child, a child who humiliated his mother said to me in the name of Rabbi Lazar. I both say, okay, so obviously there's got to be a story over here, right? So again, just to understand what's happening over here. Rav is telling over a teaching that he received from a child who humiliated his mother, who said over the name of Rabbi Lazar. Okay, we'll see the story about child humiliating his mother in just a moment. Might they say, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Vayalbesh tzedakah kisher. We'll say it's beautiful. He wears tzedakah. Pasuk from Yeshaya. Vayalbesh tzedakah kisher. He wears tzedakah like a coat of armor. So the Gemara says, "Lomar lecha mas shiryon zeh kol klipa mitzarefes l'shiryon gadol af tzedakah kol pruta mitzarefes l'cheshbon gadol." This is absolutely beautiful. Just like in a coat of armor. So we'll say, what happens in a coat of armor? So each chink, each piece of armor kind of links together with each other. See, each little piece by itself is meaningless, but you put them all together, they form a protective coat. So it was so beautiful. So too, tzedakah is like a coat of armor. Every single pruta, every penny, every dollar you give comes together, combines together to form this beautiful protective coat of armor. They'll say, what a Gemara. Rabbi Chanina Amar Rabbi Chanina says, Mihacho, Obeged Adim Kol Sid Kosenu. Ma Beged Zeh. Just like a garment, Rabbi will say, Kol Nema V'Nema Mitzarefes L'Beged Gadol. Of a garment, what happens to the garment? Every thread comes together to form the complete garment. Af tzedakah kol pruta mitzarefes l'cheshbon gadol. So too by tzedakah, every coin comes together for the final tally. So we'll say the theme is the same, whether it's the coat of armor or the thread. We'll say it's so beautiful, right? We often look at our acts of tzedakah as independent one-off acts, right? I put that dollar in the pushka. Okay, that's Thursday. I do another one on Friday. I do another one on Sunday. They're independent. One says they're not independent. In Shamayim, the Ribono Shel Olam is keeping a tally of each of those dollars. And every single time there's a dollar, it's another thread in the garment. It's another link in the armor. Until at some point in time, Baruch Hashem, I have this beautiful garment, and I have this beautiful suit of armor, which protects me, which warms me, which clothes me, which again envelops me. That's what I'm saying. But we have to know also, it's not just in tzedakah. The Gemara is illustrating this in tzedakah over here. But the truth is, it's with all mitzvahs. All mitzvahs, even the smallest of mitzvahs, combine to form something so much more beautiful. If we only understood the value and the place of every single small mitzvah that we go out and perform every day, each and every one of those things combines to form something beautiful. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Amai karila ula mishagish archase diime." Okay, so who is this guy? Who is this guy who debased his mother? Like, who is this? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Deboy minei Rav Achtaboy bar Ami me Rav Sheshas. Listen to this. Rav Achtaboy asked the following question of Rav Sheshas. Minayin Mitzora. So the Gemara says, Minayin Mitzora b'mei sipuro shemetame Adam. How do you know that a Mitzora, during the days that he's counting, right, he's counting his days, that he has the ability to convey tumah to a person? Amarlo, hoel u'metame begadim metame Adam. Since he has the ability to be metame people, he's begadim, clothing is metame people also. Amarle dimo tumah bechibur m'shain. Maybe that's not a good right. He's metame clothing. Why? Because he wears the clothing. Maybe that's why he's metame it. That's different than touching someone. Shiny hasam. Shiny Gemara says the ha hisit nevela de metame begadim metame Adam. For example, the moving of an avela conveys tumah to clothing, but doesn't convey tumah to people. Where do we know that a sheretz conveys tumah to a person? Isn't it because it is metame begadim? Just like a sheretz is metame begadim, so there's metame adam. So therefore, same idea. Just like a metzora, during his days of counting, if he's metame adam, he's also metame begadim. No. Sheretz behead yiksiv. Sheretz is different. Why? Because sheretz is explicitly written in the pasuk. O isha shariga b'chol sheretz. Ela shichvas zera dimetame adaminalan. Where do I know that shichvas zera? Siman. How do I know that shichvas zera ultimately again is metame a person? La mishum dehol metame begadim metame adam. Since it's metame begadim clothing, it's certainly metame adam, and therefore we'd apply the same thing to mitzora. Amalei shichvas zera nami behedja ksiv. Shichvas zera is also explicitly written. The Gemara says, "O ish l'rabbo says hanogea." So we'll say, so what happens? So every time, Rav Achtabai responded to Rav Sheshas, in a little bit of like a joking or almost mocking way. So Chalash daite Rav Sheshas. So Rav Sheshas was very, he was offended. Now, as a result, that Rav Achtabai, we've seen this in the Gemara, whatever you do, don't offend a Talmud Chacham. Don't offend a Talmud Chacham. Because when you offend the Talmud Chacham, you offend the Torah. When you offend the Torah, you offend the Ribono Shel Olam. So we'll say, the Gemara says, so Rav Achtabai offended Rav Sheshas. As a result, Ishtek Rav Achtabai bar Ami v'isyakar Talmudei. Rav Achtabai, Ishtek means he became mute, and he forgot all of his learning. As a result of having offended Rav Sheshas. So we'll say, now watch this. Asya Ime, his mother came along. Now we'll say, now here's what's interesting. Whose mother? Rashi says it was the mother of Rav Sheshas. Rav Sheshas' mother came before Rav Sheshas to plead to her son to forgive Rav Achtabai. V'kabach yakamei. She cried before him. So Rav Sheshas' mother cried before him to ask her son, please forgive Rav Achtabai. Savcha v'lo ashkach ba. She cried, but Rav Sheshas paid no attention to her mother. Amrulei. So literally again she said to him, Chazi lahani chadvi dematzis minayu. She literally said, look at these breasts that nursed you, and ultimately again have compassion. What she was saying was, the same way I had compassion on you when you were a little boy, and I nursed you, right? When you couldn't take care of yourself, I nursed you. I'm asking you in the same way now, take care of Rav Achtabai, who cannot look out for himself. So we'll say, so therefore the Gemara calls Rav Sheshas the son who debased his mother. That a mother has to make this type of plea to her son, right? That a mother has to remind her son, just like I nursed you when you were incapable of taking care of yourself, I'm asking you now to forgive Rav Achtabai. And again, I will say, remember, she was crying before him, and he ignored her cries to the point that she had to resort to this argument. So we'll say it's pretty profound. The Gemara calls her Sheshas, the son who debased his mother. That's what it calls Rav Sheshas. The Gemara says, Uda asan Allah minallah. Gidisanya, B'Shimon Yochai Omer. Nemar kibus begadim. So again, I will say back to the Mitzorah. Nemar kibus begadim imesi purav. So I will say, Nisan Allah minallah. So I will say, so going back to the original question about does the Mitzorah, or how is the Mitzorah during his days of counting, how do we know that he's metame a person? So the Gemara says, Gidisanya, B'Shimon Yochai Omer. Rashbi says, Nemar kibus begadim imesi purav. Nemar kibus begadim imechiluto. talks about the laundering of his clothing, the cleaning of his clothing during the days of his counting, and the laundering of his clothing when he is a confirmed mitzvah. Ma'lalan metame adam, just like over there he's metame adam, afkan metame adam. So too over here is metame adam. Okay, so we'll say that's how we know the mitzvah is metame adam in the days of his counting. Beautiful. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Gadol osets lagav seiser, yoser mi Moshe Rabbeinu. Wow. Rabbi says someone who gives tzedakah with discretion. B'seiser means he gives it quietly, privately. No one knows about it. I will say now, what's interesting is we're going to have to see what no one actually means. But in Matana B'Seiser, you give tzedakah with no one knowing. That is the highest level. So also, I want to point out, this is actually not for us to take, because we don't have time. But Lamaisa, but if we were to get into it today, I will tell you that it's actually a fascinating discussion in general about anonymous giving. So just to point out, for example, the post can bring down that with communal giving, there's dafkin inyan not to give anonymously. Why? Because it encourages other people, right? Peer pressure is a very positive thing when it comes to communal giving. So if I see, my best friend Yankel Schwartz just gave $50,000. If Yankel could do it, I could. So there's a power to that. There's a profound power to that. When Matana B'Seiser comes up, giving privately comes up much more, is when you give to people. When you give to people, the idea is if you could give without the recipient knowing, again, we're going to get into this later on, then that's a din and dignity. So community giving, people often want, again, Jews are humble, so people often don't need their names and lights, which is beautiful, but sometimes it's important for that publicity so that other people know that you're participating, and that creates a positive peer pressure. Individual giving, sometimes better to do it anonymously. The Gemara says, you give tzedakah b'seiser, you're greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Ksiv, ki, yagarti b'mea af v'achima, v'ilu b'tzoset tzedakah, ksiv, matan b'seiser, yichape af, v'shochad b'cheik chava azah. So the Gemara says, the point over here is that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to go ahead and extinguish certain types of divine anger, but not all of them. Person who gives tzedakah is able to extinguish all forms of divine anger. That's the power of tzedakah. And I will say, it makes a lot of sense, because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees Yidden doing tzedakah for each other, I will say in general, parents are, you ever have sometimes that, I have this at my Shabbos table all the time. Shalom Aleichem, and you come home, beautiful couple of Shabbos, and you're ready for like a beautiful Shalom Aleichem, and the Malachim are with you, and it's fantastic. And you start singing Shalom Aleichem, and then what happens? Everyone is talking. Everyone is talking on the table, right? They're this, they're that. And as it happens, that fire of righteous indignation begins to burn inside it. Like, Chevra, don't you know what's happening? The Malachim are here. The Shekhinah is here. And what do you do? And then you catch yourself, and you're like, this is great. This is great. Everybody loves each other. Everybody's happy with each other. I am happy to perform this solo on behalf of the family. It's like Shlucho Shal Adam Kimoso. You know what? Good. I'll sing Shalom Aleichem. And no one even seems to realize that I'm singing Shalom Aleichem. But it's not a problem. Right? Just keep. Why? Because when a parent sees that their children are happy, that they're getting along, that they're laughing, that they're making, it's fantastic. It's beautiful. Maybe you're not exactly doing what you're supposed to be doing at that moment. It's okay. When we give tzedakah and we take care of each other, it's almost as if the Ribono Shel Olam is willing to overlook everything else. He's going to say, okay, you're there for each other. You're taking care of one another. What am I? I'm supposed to be angry at you? I'm supposed to be upset at you because of all this stuff? You're talking during Shalom Aleichem? I got it. It's not great. But I love it that you love each other. And when you love each other again, I'm willing to overlook. So therefore, the Gemara says, Moshe Rabbeinu as a Yachid was able to accomplish certain things, extinguish certain types of divine anger. When you give tzedakah, you can extinguish everything. Obliged Rabbi Yitzchak. The Rabbi Yitzchak, Af kof echema. So the Gemara says, Af kof echema, Seina kof. The Gemara says, Shneimar v'shocha b'chei chama, Aza Afa v'shocha b'chei chama, Aza. Ikadami, others say, Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol dayin shenatel shochad, Maybe chema liolam, chema az liolam. Other Shabbos it's actually phrased in the negative. Any judge who takes a bribe ultimately again brings chema az. Chema says a type of divine wrath, an intense divine wrath. Shnei amar v'shocha b'chei. Rabbi Yitzchak kolonosi and pruta la'ani misparach v'sheish brachas. So beautiful. I will say anyone who gives a pruta to an ani gets 6 brachas. We'll say a pruta. A pruta is like half an aguda script, right? A pruta. you give an ani, a pruta, and literally again you get 6 brachas. Oh, sorry, watch this. There's something even better than going ahead and giving an ani money. What's even better than giving an ani money? Giving him time. Mafaisa b'dvarim literally means you appease him with words. Now this could mean again, you give him chizuk, but it could also mean you give him a smile. There are 2 ways. There are 2 ways that you can go in and give an ani money, right? You could be walking by, you could just keep your head down, lift it up like that, right? Very transactional. Or you could lift your head up. You could give a smile. Right? As they say, tein chiyuch, right? You could just give a smile. You could say good morning. You could say have a great day. You could say atzlacha rabba. And son of us, you never know the chizuk that you could give to someone with just a kind word. Now, you don't have to get into a whole conversation. Where are you from? What are you up to? How are the kids? You don't have to get into a whole conversation, right? But lamaisa, just a good morning, a shalom aleichem, a smile, or no words at all. So you give someone tzedakah, 6 brachas. 6 brachas. You give him a sense of dignity by giving him the time of day, by just a smile, by a kind word. Misbarich biyud aleph brachas. 11 brachas for a smile. 11 brachas for a good morning. 11 brachas for eye contact. 11 brachas for just giving someone a little bit of human dignity. What that means. The Gemara says, "Hanose brutalanim zarim sheish brachas tsiv halal parosh avani merudin tavi bayis kisira arum v'amafaiso dvar misarach v'achadasei brachas shneimar v'savak l'rav nafshecha v'nefesh nana tasbia v'zarach b'choshech archa v'avelascha b'tzarayim v'nacha Hashem tamid v'yeshbia b'tzach skos nafshecha ubana mimcha charbos ola mostei dar v'adar tekumim." All right, says those are all the different psukim. The Gemara says, all right, what's going to stop over here for today? Okay. Let's say incredible daf. We'll say it's not over. It's not over. There's still another blot of these beautiful tzedakah Gemara. So say again. Hopefully, we get to halacha, we get to hashkafa, and make a difference for our people. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron, have a great day, everyone.